Testing, testing. Yeah. Good morning. Folks at home, can you hear? Folks here in the chapel, can you hear? Yes. Woohoo. Eve, can I hand these to you, and if anybody else comes in and needs some note-taking paper? Thank you.
Steph, will you tell your dad I finally sent in my book proposal to publishers?
Oh, congratulations! And I think we're ready to get started. Oh, you're good. So good morning. Good morning to the folks at home. As always, we welcome you to participate in this conversation. We've got a really small group here in person in the chapel. So folks at home, we need you to chime in too. And I am monitoring the comments on Facebook. That's the way you can participate on the First Presbyterian Church of York Facebook live stream. Just write in the comments there. And we will welcome your thoughts and questions and conversation. So, good morning. We are in the middle of this video series by an author and storyteller named Bob Goff. And this series is called Everybody Always: Becoming Love in a World Full of Setbacks and Difficult People. And so every week we've been listening to Bob tell some stories and give us some thought-provoking questions to reflect on about how we can be available to love the difficult people in our lives. This is the next to last week in this series. We have one more week next week where we'll wrap up this series. And then Summer Sunday School is actually going to be on break for the month of August. And we will be reconvening 2 weeks after Labor Day. So last week is our last week of Sunday school for this program year. We'll take a bit of a summer break, and we will reconvene, I believe it is September 18th, with a whole new year of exciting things. But we still do have some adult ed opportunities that are continuing over the summer. We have on Wednesdays during the day, Wendy Smith leads the Pathfinders Bible Study Group, and I believe that they are continuing strong over the summer. Our Wednesday night Zoom Bible study is continuing every Wednesday night at 7. We are currently in the middle of reading the book of Isaiah together, and you are welcome to join us anytime, Wednesdays at 7 online. We also have every Sunday night at 7 our Zoom evening prayer that lasts about 20 minutes, and you are welcome to join us any Sunday night for that. And we also are continuing our monthly Bible on Location outdoor Bible study series. And this is important. It was originally scheduled to be today. It's ordinarily the fourth Sunday of every month. But because we have extreme temperatures and we have a heat advisory, we thought it would make more sense to postpone 1 week. So Bible on Location for July is going to be next Sunday, July 31st at 5 p.m., so a bit later in the day than we have been doing it. Next Sunday, July 31st at 5 p.m., and we are meeting this month at Rocky Ridge County Park in the Hidden Laurel picnic area, and our theme this month is Rocks in the Bible. We've been having a lot of fun each month meeting in a different location and exploring a different biblical theme that matches that location. So for July, next Sunday at 5 p.m., Rocks in the Bible at Rocky Ridge in the Hidden Laurel picnic area. Please bring a Bible and bring a chair if you can. All right, so we've got some folks joining us online. We've got some folks here in the chapel, and we are glad that you're with us as we listen to Bob and his storytelling. So here is what he says to get us started with this week's lesson. Bob writes, "In Jesus' day, eating with people was a big deal. This is because if you ate with someone, it meant that you were interested in being friends with them. It meant you accepted that person, and it was a sign to everyone else in the community about what mattered to you. Based on this, you'd think that Jesus would have picked all the morally upright, virtuous people to eat with. After all, these were the folks who had been getting it right and showing everybody else how it was done. It only makes sense that Jesus would want to point them out by having lunch, right? Well, you'd be surprised. Or maybe you wouldn't. Instead of always eating with the rule-following religious people, Jesus often ate with the wrong kinds of people. The people who had blown it. The people who were not respected. The people who were seen as the worst examples of godly living. And here's the thing. It drove the religious people nuts. One time, when these folks asked Jesus about why he did this, Jesus replied, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance." That's from Luke 5:31 to 32. Of course, Jesus knew that what opens people up to an authentic relationship with God is their need. If this sounds familiar, as in, didn't the last session open with the same lesson? You'd be right. It is a major theme in Jesus' ministry. But here's where this lesson diverges from last week's. Opening up to God is not just about recognizing your own need, but also about moving toward other needy people, even the ones you find a bit creepy. Here's the thing. If you hang around needy people, you'll find Jesus. No doubt. So the question for this week is, do you want to meet Jesus? This session shows how it works. All right. So Bob is making the claim here that if we want to meet Jesus, the way that we do that is by moving towards other people who are in need. Have any of you found that to be true in your own lives? Yeah.
Yesterday,
Oh, someone here says yesterday. Let's hear about it.
I work in a wastewater treatment plant, and we often have cars parked outside the gate who think it's the incinerator, think it's a place to pay a water bill, and they're wrong. So yesterday morning, 6 a.m., I pulled up and I said to the lady, "Can I help you?" She said, "I'm here from New York. My cat got out of the crate. It headed this way. She's trying not to cry." And I said, "Follow me in and we'll drive around the plant and see if we can find it." So we spent maybe half an hour, did not find it. I got her phone number. In the meantime, bonding with this woman that's looking for her beloved cat. At the end of the day, I called her and the cat was found, suffering from heat exhaustion, but fine. And she's driving back to New York today. But all of that, just random, a lady I don't know, I'll never see again, but have this connection with now. Just
Wow.
the coolest thing.
Wow, thanks, Sally. I don't know if those of you at home could hear that, but she was telling a story about just yesterday, a person showing up in the parking lot at her work looking for a lost cat, and taking time out of her day to be with this person, to help her find her cat, to take her contact information, and then followed up and was able to really connect with this person who was looking for their beloved companion in a difficult time. Thank you. Folks at home, we'd love to hear your stories in the comment section about ways that moving towards needy people has helped you encounter Jesus. Anybody else have a story they want to share? All right. Well, the scripture that Bob gives us for today is from John 17. So if you want to grab a Bible and follow along, you can do that. We are reading John 17, verses 20 to 23. John 17, 20 to 23. And this is Jesus speaking, and he says, "My prayer is not for them alone. I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message, that all of them may be one, Father, just as you are in me and I am in you. May they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. I have given them the glory that you gave me, that they may be one as we are one. I in them and you in me, so that they may be brought to complete unity. Then the world will know that you sent me and have loved them, even as you have loved me. So this is Jesus in prayer to the Father, praying for his disciples and praying for their unity. What do you think Jesus had in mind when he prays that all of his disciples would be one? United in one purpose. So not all identical, but sharing a common purpose. Jesus says that the unity of his disciples will tell the world that he was sent from God. What does that mean?
It's unusual.
It's unusual. Would get people's attention. Yeah.
If we're busy fighting with each other, we're not doing God's will.
If we're busy fighting with each other, we're not doing God's will. But that can be hard sometimes, right? There are a lot of people, both in the church and outside the church, that we often maybe don't necessarily feel like we're unified with. And so Bob is inviting us today to think about what might it look like to love those people that it might be hard to love, or love people in situations where it's hard to show love. And that is what he is going to talk about in his segment today. So if you'd like, I'd invite you to grab a piece of paper and jot down a few notes if there are things that catch your attention, or things you want to talk about, or questions this raises. So we'll listen to Bob talk for about 15 or 16 minutes, and then we'll have some time for conversation.
I don't know about you, but I'm really impatient. I mean, I make coffee nervous. It's crazy. I'm so amped up, and you know what? It's driving my family nuts. They're like, buddy, chill out. So you know what I did? I was reading this kid's book, and the premise of the book is really simple. It's this: whatever you fill your bucket with, you'll become. Kind of made sense. So I went to Home Depot and I got a bucket. I started carrying it around everywhere with me. I would get on airplanes with it. You know, I'd put it under the seat in front of me. People are saying, like, do you have a bladder problem? I'm like, actually, yes, but like too much information. I have a bigger problem, and it's that I'm impatient with everybody. And I decided I was gonna start filling my bucket with patience. Because whatever you fill your bucket with, you'll turn into. You fill it with a bunch of business deals, you'll turn into a business person. Fill it with a bunch of arguments, you'll turn into a lawyer. If you fill your bucket with a bunch of love, you'll actually be able to turn into love. It's crazy, but try it. I have a friend named Randy. He's the pastor of a church. He's got a band called Phillips, Craig, and Dean. I know it sounds like a law firm, but he's a really terrific guy, and he's also the pastor of a church. And he asked me if I'd come speak at his church, and it was about a year in advance, so I said, yeah, sure, no problem. Well, you guys, I get there, it's Super Bowl Sunday. I'm like, Randy, did you know it was Super Bowl Sunday when you asked me? He's like, yes, I knew nobody'd come if you weren't here. I'm like, I hate your guts. So I spoke at this thing, and I'm rushing home to be with Sweet Maria because I don't spend many evenings away. And I get to the airport and I pull up to the rental place and I got that guy. Have you ever had that guy? I mean, he's so slow. My clothes are going out of style. Entire seasons are changing. And I'm so frustrated. And then I looked in the passenger seat and I saw my bucket. And for the next 30 minutes, I said, fill it with patience, fill it with patience, fill it with patience. And when he finally got to me, I mean, I got there in spring, he got there next Christmas, and he opened the door and he said, how was your rental car experience? Man, in the old days, I just would have clocked him. But because I'd been filling my bucket with patience for all that time, you know what? I got out of the car. I said, you know what? It was awesome. I had a great time. I love the car. I love you. I love waiting. We're good. And I started walking to the airport to get a new flight, and because mine was long gone. And he grabbed me by the shoulder and he said, I just want to tell you that was an awesome sermon this morning. I said, no, you were there? What if I had said what I was thinking, like old Bob? And instead, I said the thing I should have said, which is new Bob. And the promise of Scripture is that we each get to be new creations. I mean, I've lived with all the earlier versions of old Bob for 58 long years. But new Bob, I just met him a few hours ago. And I get to say, who's that new guy? You know, I want to have that new car smell, that new creation smell. And I think you do too. And if you want more faith, you just got to do more stuff. And you don't do stuff because Jesus needs your help. I asked him. He wants your heart. I have a son who was in his senior year in high school, and he was pretty much done. You know that feeling your senior year, you know where you're going to college. He had his feet up on the handlebars. He had his fingers woven behind his back. He was coasting. And I looked at his course schedule, and he was like a ball monitor and worked in the office. I'm like, buddy, do you have any classes? And so he went up and got his class list and brought it back kind of sheepishly. And I'm like, buddy, you're barely going to school. So we went to the principal and we made a deal. He was just bored. And having young people who are bored isn't a good idea. So we made a deal. Every day he would go to school till noon, and then he'd go to the airport and work on his pilot's license. Well, there's something beautiful that happened in this. Well, my son was engaged again, and there's something about being engaged. It lets you know more about your faith. It makes you understand more about what's going around you. It helps you understand people that you don't get. A life of engagement. John 17, it's this beautiful chapter where it's like you got a glass up against the wall and you get to hear Jesus talk to his dad. And he said, if you want to know what it's like between me and my dad, just see how people are one. And you can't be one if you aren't engaged. Well, my son took pilot's lessons, and he actually got his license. I have a de Havilland Beaver seaplane. They're awesome. I mean, if they could make them out of beef jerky, they would. They're guy planes. And we keep this thing up in Canada. It's the way we get in and out of this lodge of ours. And this de Havilland Beaver, you can land in these really small lakes. And there's one in particular that for a decade we've been flying over the top of. And from up in the air, it looks like 2 bottles of Coke like connected end to end. But it's pretty short. And I've always wondered, I wonder if we could land in that lake. We started descending, and at the end of this lake, you need to make a big turn and really dive down fast to get on the water. I made the turn, I pushed all the way forward, and we actually skimmed and landed on the lake. And my son and I were like high-fiving each other and chest pumping. We're like, we did it! And I turned to him and I said, all right, buddy, you fly us out of here. And he's like, no. And I was like, yes. So we went to the end of the lake. And with the de Havilland Beaver, you need to be going 55 miles an hour before you take off the water. And he threw in all the throttle like a big dog. He was going 10 miles an hour, 20, 30, 40. I'm sitting in the passenger seat. There's no controls over there. And by the time he got to 55 miles an hour, I thought he'd pull back, but he didn't. And he got to 65 and 70, and the trees were looking pretty big. And he pulled up, and we just cleared him. It was awesome. And we're like, yeah, we did it. Then I turned to him and I said, all right, buddy, you go land us in the lake. And he's like, no. And I was like, yes. And he turned the plane. and he came into the lake, and he was coming in pretty hot. He came close to the cliff. He made this big turn, and he greased this thing on the lake. I didn't tell him at any time what he ought to do. I knew that he knew what to do. And I think that's what God does. I mean, when he landed on this lake, he started 18, he ended up 35. And I think that what God does is he grows us up by letting us do things, experience uncomfortable things, because comfortable people don't need Jesus. Desperate people do. I'm not saying do death-defying things. I'm saying do what's in front of you. And oftentimes what God does is he puts difficult people, he puts hard circumstances in front of us. And instead of giving us all the instructions, I think he knows that he wants us to land the plane. And I hope you'll land the plane. So circle up with some of the people that you're with and talk about a land the plane moment when you did something that was more difficult than you thought it could be. Forget seaplanes. Talk about somebody you met, a fear that you overcame, and what you did about it and how you resolved that. God is leaning over the rails, hoping that you and I will land the plane. I have a friend named Walter. He's a refugee from another country, and Walter has this wonderful job. What he does is he greets people when they come here from other countries, from refugee camps. And he helps them get resettled. He'll get them an apartment. He'll get them some food. He'll do whatever it takes to make them feel welcome here. I asked Walter if I could come along with him once on one of these trips to the airport. And he said, sure. And, I didn't know what to bring, so I brought a bunch of balloons. And it was so beautiful seeing these people stepping off the plane with no clothes, with no belongings, just whatever they were wearing, and a UN lanyard around their neck. And Walter greets them. I think that's the way Jesus is going to greet you and I. It won't be all the stuff that we have. In fact, Matthew 25 talked about this. It said, when we meet Jesus, the only thing he's going to want to talk about is how we dealt with people who were hungry. He said, I was hungry and you fed me. People who were thirsty, I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. People who were strange, like creepy people, like people that were outside your life experience. I was a stranger and you invited me in. People who were sick, I was sick and you comforted me. People who were naked, people who didn't have any clothes, I was naked and you clothed me. And people who were in jail, I was in jail and you came. I talk about all these things with Jesus. Matthew 25 says all he wants to talk about is this: hungry people, thirsty people, sick people, strange people, naked people, and people in jail. There's a place in San Diego, it's called In-N-Out Burger. It's a great place. If you haven't had one of those, you got to. Actually, leave now. Leave your Bible study, get one. It'll change your life. Well, I'll go and buy 50 of these things, and I'll just drive around San Diego and ask people, are you hungry? They go like, I am. And I don't write like Jesus loves you. If you've had a double-double, you know he loves you. I'll ask them if they're thirsty. I've got these little bottles of water. I'll say, have some water. And we've got a nude beach up in La Jolla. I just stand at the top of the cliff and throw socks over. Like naked people. Here's the deal. Don't just agree with Jesus. Do what he said. Hungry people, thirsty people, sick people, strange people, naked people, people in jail. Like there's no plan for you to go after it. That's the plan, that we would actually do what he said. And not because, again, he needs any help. He wants our hearts, and he gets our hearts when we start obeying him and doing the stuff that he said pleased him. Well, Walter understands what Matthew 25 was about. He understands that meeting people that don't have any clothes at the airport makes a big difference, that providing food to them. And you know the beautiful thing is we get to do the same thing too. We get to love our neighbors. And Jesus just gave some really practical tips. Find people that are hungry and thirsty and sick and strange and naked, people in jail, and see what you can do. And it's this easy. It might be as easy picking up the phone. Remember in Love Does, I put my cell phone number on the last page of the book. Remember? Well, I get all these calls. I get 50 calls a day. I can't get a thing done. And I don't send anybody to voicemail. You know why? Because Jesus was always available. It was like he had his shirt untucked and he would let people come up and give a tug on it. Remember, he turned around to that woman and said, who was that? Or the little guy in a sycamore tree, he's like, lunch on you. He had time for everybody. And I was finding I was getting less available. How about you? So what I decided to do is I would not send anybody to voicemail. And I get all these calls. People don't follow vision, they follow availability. And there's something beautiful that happens. Every time I pick up the phone and say hello, I just answer it every question anybody has. People just want to know, is it really true? And they want to know that about you, and they want to know that about me. And we can answer that by saying hello. And so try it for a week. Don't send anybody to voicemail. And if this is going to wreck your life, you don't have to change your ringtone to a rooster crowing, and on the third ring you've denied Christ. I didn't like that. But just be available. Watch what'll happen in your life and in the lives of the people that are around you. I was sitting down as a lawyer with somebody and doing my best to give him some advice, and the phone rang. And so I excused myself. I said, hey, listen, I never send anybody to voicemail. So I answer the phone and it says, you have a call from, and it went into this recording. I'm like, whatever. So I hung up. A couple minutes later, the phone rings again. It says, you have a call from, and then the recording started. So I thought, well, I'll just listen to the recording and then, at the end say, stop calling me. Well, it said, you have a call from the Sacramento State Penitentiary. And it went on to say, press 5 for your call. So I'm like pressing 5. I'm like, this is awesome. And I had it figured out in advance. No doubt there was a crook in there, and he'd read Love Does and was calling me up just to tell me what a boss I was and what an awesome book. So I said, hello, it's Bob here. And then he said, well, where's my girlfriend? I'm like, oh, no, wrong number, buddy. And you know what? The Love Does number is 1 digit off from his girlfriend's number. So I'm like, oh, buddy, so sorry. Like, this isn't her. And I hung up the phone. I got back to being a lawyer, and about 5 minutes later, the phone rings again. I pick it up and I say, hello, and there's this recording. You have a call from, so I press 5. And the same guy is on the other end of the line, this guy in jail, and he says, will you call my mother? I felt like I was his concierge. So I put it on a merged call, right? So we could both be on the line. And the phone rang a couple times and she answered, and he said, Mom, just so good to talk to you. And he said a couple things. And he said, I just want to tell you that I love you. And she hung up. Oh man, it was just me and him on the phone now. And I said, buddy, I am so sorry. What is it that you need? And he said, I need a bracelet. I'm like, a bracelet? I would have thought an alibi, a cake with a file in it, a couple bed sheets tied together, but never a bracelet. And I said, why? And he said, actually, it's an ankle bracelet. And I've been in prison for a while, and I've qualified to get one of these things, but I don't have any money. I'm like, buddy, I'll pay for it. I'll hook you up. What color do you want? The next day, I found out how much it costs to LoJack a felon. It was nuts. But here's the deal. If you want a good deal, go to a garage sale. If you want Jesus, you go find some people to creep you out. Like, there's something that happens to us when we get uncomfortable. We start needing Jesus more. Well, I don't know if I'll ever hear from this guy again. I kind of think someday I'll see him walking down the street with my flat screen. But one of the things that I've been learning is that if we really want to get about our faith, if we really want to love everybody always, then it's going to take us moving a little bit further than where we've been before to make a next courageous step. What it really boils down to is this question: what are you going to fill your bucket with? And for some of you, it's full to the brim already. Like, it's so full of other stuff, there's no room for the next thing. And so a parallel question would be, what do you need to get out of your bucket? What have you been carrying around that you don't need to make a little bit of room? I mean, half of you guys are afraid you're going to lose your job, and the other half of you are afraid you're going to keep it. You might want to quit. You know what I did early on? I wrote my resignation letter. I put a stamp on it. I addressed it to my boss, and I gave it to my wife. I said, you mail this thing in if this job ever gets in between me and you or me and my faith. You don't even need to tell me. I'll find out. What are you going to make room in your bucket for? And what are you going to fill it with? You guys, that's the heavy lifting, and that's where faith grows. What I'd like for you guys to talk about now is, what would be a next uncomfortable step for you? Who's somebody that you could engage that you've been avoiding? Who's somebody that kind of has creeped you out that you engage? And it might be somebody in our faith community, it might not be, but I bet you this. I've just got this hunch that when we get to heaven, all the people in our community of faith that we couldn't agree with, I bet you anything Jesus makes us roommates with in heaven. We can argue about the top bunk for eternity. All right, you guys, go have a discussion about what's the next step for you.
All right. So Bob started off this segment by talking about this idea of what's in your bucket. And he said that whatever your bucket is filled with, that's who you become. And he said that he actually did this exercise of buying a bucket from the hardware store and carrying it around with him as a visual reminder to himself that he wanted to fill his bucket with more patience and therefore have patience to engage with other people. So I'd love to hear from folks here and folks at home, what would you like to fill your bucket with? And the other half of that question that he asked us is, what do we maybe need to take out of our buckets to make room for the things that help us be more Christ-like? What do we want to fill our buckets with? Joy. Beautiful. I relate to Bob's example about patience.
I keep thinking if he hadn't been patient to the rental car, what would that have said? I mean, just what a lineup person that was taking his car back.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Eve reminded us of that story he told about how it turned out that the person who was being really slow working with his rental car had heard his sermon in church earlier that day. And she wondered, what would have happened if he had been impatient and rude to that worker? That would have really changed the way that message would have been received.
Perspective. I handle hardship better when I stop and think it through.
Sally says perspective is something she would like to fill her bucket with. Being able to actually stop and think things through. Yeah. Maybe sometimes that means the ability to recognize that our perspective isn't the only one, to see where other people are coming from more readily.
I think sometimes courage to keep going on.
Yeah, courage. Yeah, Linda.
Maybe I shouldn't say this, but I'm laughing now even thinking about last week, Dee Dee, I should be spelling this like that. She made me laugh. She said about the bucket and being full, and she says, or I was saying about bucket, about being full and stuff. She says, well, I wonder if it has a hole in it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, bringing up the idea of, well, what if your bucket has a hole in it? That's an interesting question too. What are some of the things that zap our courage and our joy and our patience? Yeah. Michelle is chiming in online and she says she wishes her bucket had action in it. Bob definitely talked about that, of not just agreeing with Jesus, but doing what he said. Byron is mentioning online how struck he was by that line in the video. Bob says, don't just agree with Jesus, but do what he said. Yeah. We've got a comment online here. I don't think I'm self-aware enough to know what I want to fill my bucket with. Any given day, it is a different thing, I think. Yeah, I think that's true for many of us. So maybe even just self-awareness or discernment or wisdom.
I like the discernment part, because sometimes, I think maybe I'm doing something that really is good for somebody, but it might not.
Yeah.
It might not be what they really want, or what they really need.
Right.
So I think maybe someone might need it.
Yeah, thank you. Anne was mentioning the importance of discernment and how sometimes it's so easy to think you're doing the right thing or think you're doing what someone needs, but that turns out not to be what's helpful. And of course, sometimes what's useful is different in different situations. Yeah, Linda.
I think to fill my bucket with more trust.
Trust. Thank you. So Bob said in the video that sometimes God puts difficult people or difficult situations in front of us, and that in those situations he wants us to land the plane. And by that he was referring to this story he told about his son getting his pilot's license and learning to fly and needing to land the plane in this, little strip of water. And he sort of, as a father there with his son, trusted that his son knew how to do it, but had to actually encourage him, you have the training, you need to just actually do it. And so Bob said that oftentimes our interactions with other people can be like that sometimes God puts difficult people in our lives and asks us to land the plane, to do it.
I struggled with that a bit because sometimes really bad things happen and people will say happen for a reason as if God causes that kind of remarkable suffering, and I don't believe that. But for God to put people in our lives like the cat lady yesterday, that I have experienced.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Sally. She was saying that line was difficult for her because sometimes people talk in really unhelpful and wrong ways about God causing suffering or God causing bad or evil things to happen. And that is absolutely a false idea that we want to steer clear of. But I don't think that Bob was talking in this video about God being the cause of, evil in the world. I think Bob was talking about ways that he orchestrates people's paths so that your paths cross with other people. And it sounded like you brought up that example of the person looking for her cat. And it sounded like that was an experience that was impactful for her and also for you. And that when you spoke of it, you spoke of seeing God's hand in that. But it also sounded like that was a story where you had to very intentionally make a choice to put aside the, other things on your to-do list and actually focus on this person when it would have been very easy to just say, oh, well, good luck, see ya. But you actually spent time to be with her and to hear her sorrow and her pain and her fear and to be with that and to engage with her and her suffering.
Did she find the cat?
She did, and the cat is fine.
Because I'm worried all day about this.
I did, that the cat
Oh
was
my
hit
God,
by
I'm
a
so
car
glad.
and was.
Makes me feel better.
Yes, they're clarifying that this person did in fact find the cat.
Alive.
Yes, alive and well, yes.
Good.
But Bob asked us to consider if we have had any land the plane moments where we had an encounter with maybe a difficult person and sensed that God was asking us to do it, to step out of our comfort zone. Folks at home, we'd love to hear if you have any stories of land the plane moments with difficult people.
I've had the experience that someone difficult came up to me and said, I've been thinking about what you said, and when they started talking about it, it was something I said 3 months ago, but they had been thinking about it all that time, and it did make a change that I had no idea was going on, that kind of thing has happened to me.
Oh, wow. That's a story of a difficult person coming up to her and saying, I've been thinking about what you said. And it turned out it was something that they said 3 months ago. And so not even realizing how those words had a lasting impact. So sometimes we don't realize the significance of those moments until well after, it sounds like.
I feel like most people, this is like just not convincing someone to agree with you, or like maintaining a relationship even when there's tension or disagreements. Like that can be with people who really, really irritate me, like at my job, thinking of one person. But it can also just be with family members who I really love, but I'm also like, couldn't you just like not irritate me in this way? You know, and so for me, it's like I want to make all relationships perfect, but I think landing the plane means living with like a certain amount of unresolved irritation with somebody.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. Emily's talking about this desire that I think many of us experience to just want everyone to agree with us and just want everyone to do things the way that we think is best. And being willing to just live in those relationships with that unresolved tension of being able to say, I can live with the fact that you don't agree with me, or I can live with the fact that you really, really irritate me, and I'm going to keep loving you anyway and keep showing up. And depending on what the thing is, that can be really hard, especially when we have to if it's not just a one-time thing. I think in some ways, Bob's story about the car rental was maybe easier. It was a one-time thing. It wasn't somebody he was going to see again. It was annoying at the time, but then it was over. Sometimes these people, that we have ongoing relationships with, if they're loved ones, if they're family members, if they're coworkers, if they're friends, that they have things that really bother us, and we're with them in it for the long haul.
I was thinking maybe I'm the irritation. It's
Ooh.
not always somebody else who's. I have to admit that perhaps I'm irritating.
Speaking of self-awareness and discernment, Eve said, what if sometimes I'm the irritation? That can be a courageous question to ask, speaking of courage. Were there other things from this talk that you jotted down, or things that really caught your attention? Things you wanted to talk about?
Well, I thought it was interesting that he said Jesus grows us up by experiencing those difficult things in life. And we know that because we have faith and because we believe doesn't mean we're not going to experience difficulties.
Yeah.
That's certainly going to grow us, in how we handle those things.
Yeah, thank
Show
you.
something, not that we're showing something, wanting to show something to the world, but how we can be a light to other people by how we get through our own.
Yeah, thank you for that. Anne said that she was struck by the part in the video where he was talking about God using really difficult circumstances and using challenges to grow us. And that can also then be a way that we serve others. Having those experiences can make us more available, can make us better able to love.
I was just struck by, he was really talking about this as like kind of a spiritual formation practice, and that, this is different from prayer, it's different from Bible study, because it's like not tidy. I mean, not that those things aren't necessarily, but it's certainly not individual. It's not all within our control, so I like that way of thinking about it as like a spiritual practice.
Yeah, oh, thank you for that. Emily says that she was struck watching this video by the way that it really sounds like a spiritual practice, but it's not quite as tidy as we often think of prayer or Bible study, but that it is something that we practice and that God uses to shape us, and that we do it with other people. But yeah, we often don't know how it's going to turn out. But yeah, the idea of thinking of this sort of availability to love others as a spiritual practice, that's helpful.
I like, building on that, that all the earlier versions of me are gone, and this is a new, improved, updated model, and that every time I get a new spiritual practice or a new experience that I learn from, I'm now, 2.0, 2.2.
Yeah. That sounds like what Jesus was talking about when he said, "You are a new creation. The old is gone, the new has come." Sally used the language of being, me 2.0. That we are not the same people that we used to be, that we are really, by God's grace, through the power of the Holy Spirit, we are growing. We are being conformed more and more into the likeness of Jesus. That God really can give us new things to fill our buckets.
He had written a book. Not many of us have written books and have our phone number in the back of it. So of course he can get lots of calls, but we can do it in little ways too. Like when someone calls you and you have your whole day planned out, but someone might need something, we can be called to drop all those other things we were going to do and help someone. Might not be a call from prison, like he was just visiting, or whatever. But those little things that we might perceive of sometimes are very little to the person who is on the other end asking.
Thank you. Anne was mentioning the fact that he put his phone number in the back of his book and invited people to call him. And he said that he has a practice of always picking up the phone whenever it rings. And that may not be a practice that works for all of us. I think there are sometimes very good reasons to pay attention to what you're doing in the moment and get back to your voicemail later. But Anne's reminder that we all can be open to being interrupted, being open to perhaps the unexpected ways that other people might need us to be available. Yeah. We've got a comment here online. His land the plane metaphor is a common one for him. His previous book and video was called Love Does. He is always reminding us to do it. An issue for me, though, is this matter of availability. He has a pretty flexible schedule and is able to go buy stuff for people. Some of us have work or family demands that make it hard to serve others well. That frustrates me at this point in my life. I wish I could be more flexible to drop everything and help a person in need. Does anybody else have that, or am I just making excuses? Thank you for that comment, Byron. I imagine that's something a lot of us are thinking. That Bob has a lot of flexibility in his schedule. Bob has a lot of disposable income. Bob has a family and a work environment that is able to let him drop things and come back to them on his own time. So what does this idea look like for the rest of us? For those of us who are living maybe more ordinary lives with demands and responsibilities and constraints.
Letting my kid interrupt me.
Emily says, letting my kid interrupt me. Yeah, there may be some times when we can't be interrupted, but for most of us, there probably are at least some times when we can.
Well, yes.
Yeah.
I can't let everyone in the world have access to me, but I can let my kids have access to me.
Yeah, and realizing, who are the most important people that we really need to prioritize being available to.
What's the money that we got during COVID, the checks that we got? Stimulus checks. So those of us that were still working and didn't need them, and there were so many people who were hungry, so I donated that money to feed the hungry because I wasn't hungry and people were. Those kinds of things.
Yeah.
I can't do that every day, but I could do that in that moment.
That's a great example. Sally was talking about the COVID relief checks that were sent out from the government, and knowing that a whole lot of people were out of work at that time, but that she still had a steady job. And so knowing that because she still had her normal income, to think of that stimulus check as something that she could use to share with those who were not currently able to work. And I think that's maybe a really helpful framework in general for a lot of things, about reflecting on when do we get sort of bonuses of time or energy or resources, and thinking of those as things to be shared. That's really helpful, Sally. One thing that I really struggle with, but am trying to be more intentional about doing, is definitely not answering the phone whenever it rings, but actually responding to anyone who leaves a voicemail. And I'm not good at that. Many of you may have been frustrated by that yourselves. But that's something, and being able to do it on my own schedule, do it when it makes sense, but to actually reply to people who reach out, rather than just saying, oh, I'll do it later, and then never actually doing it.
One comment he made towards the end was that when we get uncomfortable, we need Jesus more. I also like to remember that when things are going well, I really need to show my gratitude and give thanks that things are going well, not just ask to please get rid of the situation.
Yeah. Yeah, the importance of gratitude. Byron chimes in online, I think, to this conversation about who do we prioritize. And he says, Jesus said we have to prioritize the poor, which I think speaks to Sally's example. Well, we have just a moment left here, and so I'm going to close by reading a short paragraph here from Bob, and then we'll be done. When I got home from Austin, I told Maria all about my trip and Randy's church and the rental car guy. I told her how I sat in line and filled the bucket with patience. She nodded as I waved my arms, and she looked at me with a grin and a twinkle in her eye as I told her about how much progress I had made in being patient. When I was all done, I asked her what she thought about everything I was learning. With the sincerity of Mother Teresa and the wisdom of the ages, she leaned over to me and whispered, "Get a bigger bucket." As I think about it now, I realize I looked pretty silly walking around with my bucket, but I probably look even sillier walking around with all my pride and selfishness and impatience. Even more so to the people who were closest to me, the ones my life wasn't working for. The same is probably true for you and the ones you love. Now, when I'm feeling overwhelmed by distractions, or someone hurts my feelings, or I'm feeling a little impatient, I grab my bucket. I still mess up more often than I want to. When I do, instead of beating myself up, wishing I were the guy who had it all figured out, I hear the gentle and kind voice of Jesus reminding me once again to stop laying sod where he's planting seed in my life. His reason is simple. He's more interested in making us grow than having us look finished. He wants me to realize I'm just not quite there yet. All right, friends. Well, thank you so much for your conversation and for sharing your thoughts. We will be back next week with the final lesson in this series and our final Adult Ed on Sunday morning for this year. So come back next Sunday at 9:40 here in the chapel or online.